when there's abusive leadership, they'll often get into weird things, and they're not correctable. If you went to them and said, "Oh, that's against the Word of God. What you're doing right there is idol worship, or you're doing something you shouldn't be, or they're not correctable." That goes to show you there's an issue, big time. We have to remain correctable. All of us do, but as leaders, I have to be correctable. I'm not perfect at all, and I mess up very easily. I will admit, I'm the first person usually to go, I screw up all the time. Because listen, if we're not honest, what are we? And that's one thing, when the Lord called me years ago, I told the Lord, I said, I don't want to be a mean person. And I want to speak your word, but I don't want to be nasty about it. Because I've seen nasty. And I've seen it done abusively. I've seen leadership that tells you what to do and tells you what house to buy and who to marry and where you can work and what car you should buy. And they literally act like they own your life. That is not healthy. First of all, number one, God is your Lord, not me. Jesus Christ is your Lord, not leadership. Our job is to guard your soul. If we see something, to come to you and say, hey, do you see this? Because this is what I see. It's to speak into your life, to encourage you, to correct. But it is not to own. Right. There's no ownership here. In fact, just the opposite. This is one thing that has always kept my view very keeled, even keeled. We stand even keeled at the cross, shoulder to shoulder. I don't stand to some pitch higher than you. Pastor Danielle does not walk around like I stand higher than everybody. She doesn't act like that. I've never seen her act like that. Now she corrects, she's correcting because she knows she's responsible. But not because she has an attitude of control. It's totally different. And I've seen the attitude of control. There is an attitude with it. And so what happens with manipulation and control, and I've talked about this before with the spirits of Jezebel. I talked about this because I talked about the eunuch of a wilderness, where you can get into a wilderness experience and also become a eunuch. And it's in one of our sessions that we talked about. Jezebel created eunuchs. What she did is she made people worship her. And then she cut them off from their family and cut them off from their future. They weren't allowed to reproduce. They weren't allowed to be different. They weren't allowed to be unique or their own person. She owned their life. She owned them. And when they had to serve her, they had to do everything. And eventually, they were actually her undoing. Because when Jehu called up to them, she was in the window, and she was trying to seduce a prophet. And I laugh at that because if it's a real prophet of God, he's not going to be seducible. And she's in the window, and he calls to the eunuchs to cast her down. See, when you try to control somebody, eventually the control will die. There's a day they will get sick of the control and they will overthrow you. And that's what they did. They threw her out the window and she got eaten by dogs. They went to go clean her up and she was already eaten. That's what happened to her. So what happens with the eunuchs, though, is eventually they get sick of it. See, if you live under abuse, eventually, as you begin to get healthy, you'll get sick of the abuse and you'll say enough. That's exactly what they did. God does not desire to cut you off from your family, your past, or your future. He wants you to move forward in it. Even your past, he wants you to be healthy and whole and leave it, but he's not going to cut you off from everything that you ever knew. Another way to see this is another way to see some spiritual abuse. Look at some of the cults that have taken place where they have cut people off from their family, stuck them in little tiny villages and behind closed gates and totally, and these men have claimed to be Christ and all that kind of stuff. You look at these different cults, Waco and all the crazy ones and the ones that drink the juice and I mean all the stuff. It's crazy. But how do they get people to believe that stuff? How do they get people to honestly, but see, that's spiritual abuse. And then to start training these people that these guys can have multiple wives and multiple relationships and things totally outside of the Word of God. I will tell you one thing, one of the signs with spiritual abuse is that they twist the Word of God. If they don't speak it at all, they'll move completely away from it, but they twist it. And that is, I mean, if you are reading the Word of God and what the leadership is speaking to you does not line up, you need to raise some questions. Because it needs to line up to the Word. But every time I've seen someone get off, because they got off in the Word. Galatians 5 says that a little inclination in error, just a little bit of error takes the whole church off course. In the Amplified it says that. We've always said a little leaven leavens the whole lump. We were always taught leaven means sin. Go look at that in the Amplified. It says a little inclination in error and the whole church, and it says false teaching in there. And the whole church goes off somewhere. Now think of it this way as a ship. If a ship just slightly changes the rudder and moves just a little bit, just a little degree, can take them miles off course in the end. That's why it's so important that we stay to the Word. And the first thing you'll see with leadership when it gets abusive is it will take you out of the Word. The very first thing they have to do is tell you that the Bible really was written by men, so you shouldn't have to listen to it. That's the kind of stuff that they'll say. And I've seen it and I've heard it. And if they can get you to bite, and that's exactly how these men got people into these communities and communes in different places. They left their families. They went into very abusive situations. Some of them have lost their lives. And then even if they have gotten out of it, their minds haven't gotten out of it. Their souls haven't gotten out of it. Their hearts are still very broken. Because they don't know how to live outside of that anymore because it so brainwashed them.